Hejsa. I've been doing some tidying in my fabric scraps, or rather in my Denyse Schmidt fabric scraps. So I've sorted them so that I've got sort of larger usable pieces in here. And then in this paper bag I have got loads of tiny scraps. Most of them strips of any kind of length or width. Well, I say any kind of width. Most of them are sort of like this, so I don't know, about an inch, quarter of an inch, inch and a half maybe. Some of them are a bit bigger. So I've just tossed them in here because I want to do some sewing without a plan. Just sit by my machine and pass some fabric through the needle, or under the needle I should say. Among the scraps I also found this. I'm not sure what my plan was for this. It's just loads of strips sewn together. I don't know, maybe I'll cut it up and turn it into, well, I don't know really. In amongst the scraps I also found these Wonky log cabin blocks, or starter blocks, and that is kind of what has inspired me to want to just do some sewing without a plan, to try and use up some of these scraps. And I think also because this quilt is on the footstool by my chair when we sit and watch TV in the evening, and this part of it, this is actually on the back of it, is made up of lots of these wonky log cabins and all kinds of other things, larger bits of fabric. So anyway, I'm just gonna move this. It's kind of awkward having this on my lap here. Alright, so I thought maybe I'll show you how to make these log cabins, or wonky log cabins. Although if you are a quilter, maybe you've already made some, or at least you can guess how they go together, even if you only made the, let's call them proper log cabins, or even log cabins. Before we proceed, I just want to show you these tulips from the garden. Don't know if you can, yeah, that's fine. Aren't they gorgeous? We have the sort of regular kind as well. There's one just there. But I really love these ones that they're almost like peonies. They're just so beautiful. And these are mostly in the, well, I say garden, it's really just a large flower bed at the front of the house. In our back garden we have some bluebells, and they are self-sown. I haven't planted them or anything. I'll put a little bit of video of them in here. They're just so beautiful. And one year there was one plant, and then I don't know, a couple of years later there was another one. So this year I want to try and collect seeds and see if we can get some more plants. Alright, so the wonky log cabins. What you need are some scraps, so let's just pull out a handful here. So you can start with whatever shape you want in the middle really, But I tend to start with something that's fairly small, fairly squarish. I don't know if I can find any among these ones. Let's just take this one off this bit here, and there's another bit sewn on. I should have brought some scissors to the table so that I could cut this smaller. Anyway, so you start with a center piece, and then you find another piece that is the same length or slightly longer maybe. So those two together, and then you find another bit. And the good thing about Wonky log cabin is that you don't have to worry about if there's proper, let's say this one is a little bit wonky actually, which is perfect. Don't have to make sure that it's 1 inch this end as well. So I would, once I'd sewed those two together, I could sew that onto there, trim it down, and then find something else. This one maybe, that would go on there, and sew that on, and then take this one for example, and then just sort of build it up. And you could even use something like this that is made up of smaller pieces. But I think for this I'm just gonna stick with the single pieces, at least for now. So I think we're gonna move over to the sewing machine because that's a little bit easier to show you how it actually comes together. So I'll see you over there. Alright, so here I have got my starting point. I've cut it down a little bit so that it's more sort of squarish. And then I picked another color because the one I picked originally was a bit too similar to the center piece. I tried to sort of use contrasting colors because otherwise sometimes it can be quite difficult to tell where the different strips are, especially if I'm using a fairly small strip. So this one is just about 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, just under 1 inch, and with a quarter seam or quarter inch seam allowance, and there's not much left of it. Anyway, let's sew these two together. Right, here we are. So the next one I had picked out is this yellow one, and I think maybe it's a bit too similar to the green, so I'm going to pick something else. I have a big pile next to the sewing machine of all my scraps. Yeah, let's use this one. And then I trim off the excess. And now it looks like this. So now I think I can use this yellow one. So I don't always start at the end of a strip, especially like this one. It looks like it would be a little bit narrow, so I'm just gonna start up here where it's a little bit wider. And again, I trim off the excess. In this case, it's at both ends. And that just goes back into the pile of scraps. Right, so here in the center, it's sort of red-orange, and I had picked this one, but again, it's too similar, so let me find something else. This one, yeah. Well, it is a little bit narrow. Let's go at the other end. Sometimes you have to be mindful of how you position it, because you usually end up with edges that aren't straight. So you just have to be careful how you sew it together. So sometimes from one side it looks like you have a fairly wide seam allowance, but once you trim it all down, it'll be fine. Cut that off. I'm using a shorter stitch length than I normally would. So the normal stitch length on my sewing machine is 2.4, whatever that means. But for this I am using a 2.0. Right, so it's starting to come together now. And as is the case when you're also making regular log cabin blocks, you always sew the next bit onto the side where you have two seams. So in this case that's here. On the other ones there are one and none. Do I want to use that now? Yeah, let's go for it. Trim it down, and then I'm ready for the next bit. It is just very enjoyable to just spend half an hour, which can very quickly turn into an hour once you get into the rhythm of it. And there's no rule for how big you can make these. I guess once you run out of strips that are long enough, then you will eventually have to stop. It's turning out quite nice, this. When I'm making these, I'm actually usually chain piecing them. Again, because it gives a nice rhythm, but also because it saves on thread and it saves on having to get the needle up and down. So let's just try and do some chain piecing. So I'll start with that one, and that can go in the center of the other one. Right, so let's take this one. So I'll sew that one to this one. And because it's longer, just sort of turn it, and then I'm ready for that one. Let's find something. This one. And then I snip off the first one, if I can find it. There we go. Trim it and just cut off that thread. That's my center bit. And I will sew on the next one. Let's use this one. And again, because that's longer, I turn it around. And I trim this one. So when it's just two pieces, I just keep in mind that the center one is on the right and the one I have added onto it is on the left. See, that one works. Trim the excess. And again, my starting point is on the right and what I added is on the left. I generally try to find a piece that is either a lot too long or just about the right size. I don't want to use pieces where I then have to cut off bits that I can't use. Right, I'll trim this one. So I could, I guess, leave this one really wide, but I'm not sure I like how that would look, so I'm just gonna trim it so that it's about the same width. And that's on the left, and then I can take this bit. I think you can see how when you're chain piecing it like this, that you can get into a really nice rhythm of making them. So there aren't any rules for how to put them together. But I guess I have sort of guidelines for myself when I'm making them, that I don't want the same fabric repeated, or at least not right next to where I have just used it, maybe. And also, like I said earlier, that I try to have some contrast so that the individual strips are visible. But apart from that, anything goes, really. Alright, so now this has got to the point where I have the two seams at the top. So let's see what we can find in this giant pile. And I'm not worrying too much about the seams. They tend to sort of fall outwards, so that's just what I let them do. And I don't worry about whether it's on light fabric or dark one. And I never press the seams as I'm working on it. I just maybe lightly finger press it if it needs it. Trim off the excess, and then I'm ready for the next one. But I think you get the idea of how this works. So I think I'm going to sit and make a bunch of these, and then I'm gonna come back and show you what I have made. I'll see you in a bit. Well, it's the next day, and here is the first Wonky log cabin I started. And oh, still haven't cut these apart. The other two that I was chain piecing. So we have this one and this one that I still need to trim down. I might as well do that now. So when I'm making these, I'm not using my rotary cutter, I'm just using a pair of scissors, because that's a lot quicker than having to get out the cutting mat and the rotary cutter. Right, so here's this one. I'm not sure that these are done yet, the bigger ones. I think I would like them to be around 7 inches when they're ready to sew together, or sew together with something at least. So those are the ones I started yesterday. And here are a couple, oh, actually 3. And 2 of them are still attached. So it's really random how I pick the fabrics. It's mainly based on the length. So in the center part I have more choice, because most of my scraps are sort of this sort of size. But the longer pieces I just have to use whatever fits. So that's how I've ended up with this, almost a frame of these darker fabrics, which is fine. Once it gets sewn together with something else, you'll see it sort of disappears. So now I have, how many is that? 6 that are sort of almost finished. And then this morning I was just doing a little bit of sewing, and I started these two. I quite like these ones because I've sort of ended up with fairly wide sections compared to the center, which is quite fun. The other ones, they are more, at least in the beginning, so sort of the same width. So it's fun to have some variety. Right, and then of course I've got these three that I found when I was tidying. And I really like how, because these are all Denyse Schmidt fabrics, and although some of them are very different, they also have, I don't know, the same sort of vibe. And she also uses similar colors spread across her collections. So they all, so at least to me, they seem to go together. So yeah, now I have my Wonky log cabins. And when I was sewing these, I sort of had an idea that maybe instead of just making log cabins like this, I might do some where I start with, well, maybe not this one, it's too small, but start with a triangle or maybe a hexagon shape and see how that turns out. So I don't know, I might do another video where I try out different shapes to start with, and then somehow get from a triangle, for example, to something that will be square or rectangular. So I don't know. Have you ever made wonky log cabins that started with a triangle? Well, that's something for another day. And as you can see, I've got plenty of scraps still to use up, and these aren't even all of them. And I've also got this box of larger scraps, which I may have to dip into a little bit so that I can cut some longer pieces for sort of the outside of as the squares get larger. But we'll see. I want to try up and use the properly scrappy scraps first, and then maybe dig into this one. So yeah, that's it. Wonky log cabins for now. Just lay them out. Is this something that you would try? Are you more the kind of quilter who likes everything to be nice and neat? Because this is not super neat. It is nice. I really like it. I like how it's just very random and you end up with fabrics next to each other that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily have put together, and they really sort of speak to each other. I quite like that. For example, here I probably wouldn't have used this stripe with this checkered fabric, but I really like them together, especially that sort of lime green colour there, this little corner here. I really like that. And then of course there are things that I definitely would have put together, like the green and the pink here. green and pink. It's always a good combination. Alright, I think I'm just gonna go and continue making wonky log cabins and see how I get on. Right, so I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to wonky log cabins. If you did like the video, please give it a like. And maybe subscribe so that you don't miss the next. I guess this is going to be a small series of videos about wonky log cabins. So I hope you have a great day, whatever you're making.